Okay, so I'm back here with Dr. Jay Bernstein. How are you today, Jay?
Great, doing awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. So today I have a question for you. I'm wondering if anybody has looked at the outcomes between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated children, just in sort of real life pediatric patients.
Yeah, there's actually a study by Hooker and Miller published in 2020 in the journal Sage. And they looked at actual pediatric records in three different pediatric practices in the US. It was about 1,500 patients they looked at, and they looked at the vaccinated versus unvaccinated and up to the first year of life. There was another part of the study as well, but in this, the first part, they looked at in the definition of vaccinated, they got at least one or more vaccines up to the age of one, and then the unvaccinated, of course, up until the age of one, no vaccine. And then they looked at those patients when they turn after they turn 3 and then 5 years old, right? So what they found is really similar results, slightly more pronounced when they became 5, but at the age of 3 or greater, they found the odds of developmental delay 2 to 1 of the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated in this pediatric population, this practice, these three practices. They looked at also asthma. They found asthma was about 4.5 to 1 in terms of the vaccinated got asthma more basically there's a 4 to 1 odds of them getting asthma versus unvaccinated. And also they looked at ear infections as well. And that was about basically a 2 to 1 odds of getting ear infections in the vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And interestingly, they did a sort of a control in the study where they looked at head injuries. You don't expect a head injury is going to be associated with vaccines, and lo and behold, in the study, it wasn't associated at all. So that's kind of validated the results. Another part of the study, in the same study, they looked at vaccines up to the age of 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and 24 months. So they went up to 2 years, um, and they looked at the vaccines. In other words, the patients who got vaccines up to the age of 6, then that was it, no more after that, and then 12 months, no more after that kind of thing, all the way up to 24 months. And then they looked at these children at the age of 3 years or older, and they found the ones that had vaccines up to the age of 6 months had a 95% increased risk of developmental delay. The ones that got vaccines up to 12 months had an 118% increased risk of developmental delay. The ones that were vaccinated up to 18 months had a 192% increased risk in developmental delay. And the ones that were vaccinated up to 2 years, 24 months, had a 251% increased risk of developmental delay compared to children who are unvaccinated in this pediatric population. It's quite interesting.
That's really fascinating. That's so significant. I mean, those are really wild numbers, if you think about it. And I'm wondering, I mean, I'm curious. You've been a doctor, you've been in the conventional medicine world for, over 20 years now. In terms of like your colleagues and your experience, would you say that like most pediatricians are aware of these studies and will try to explain, some of the dangers and some of the data that's in these studies to their patients so that they can make like an informed decision?
Um, that's kind of the $64,000 question because why, this study and, any other discussions we've had and we will have are going to be really going counter to the narrative. So how can that be? How can it be that these studies are out and the pediatricians are saying the opposite? Well, the way the system works is that, you learn a whole body of information in medical school. You learn how to practice medicine in residency, and there's really sort of a narrative created. And I'm not saying that this is all real information. You learn pathophysiology, pharmacology, mechanisms, and how things work, and it's all legitimate. It's all real. Um, but the problem is that there is somewhat of an indoctrination that goes along with it. For example, like you learn the mechanism of how interferon works, and interferon's used as a pharmaceutical given for MS and cancers, but you don't learn that garlic will increase a person's natural interferon, and that's also published data in the scientific literature. I mean, everything that we learn in medicine, is really starts with the, science that's published in the scientific literature that we can find in PubMed. Um, it all starts there. We learn this information, but there are things that are missing. There are things that are published that are known that are missing. That's not part of this unified narrative of what we learn and how we practice medicine. So I've been sort of looking around at other things that are that are outside this sort of unified narrative, and the narrative is that vaccines are safe. The narrative that the American College of Pediatrics and the all the other governing bodies and are telling us that they're safe. So what reason would there be for any pediatrician to start digging through the literature to see if it's unsafe? I think why would they suspect we're being lied to? But the reality is there are many studies looking, in fact, all the studies that are looking at vaccinated versus unvaccinated in various ways, looking at outcomes that are real outcomes, like, development infections, neurobehavioral problems, developmental delays, chronic diseases, any of these outcomes of vaccinated versus unvaccinated, they're all showing the same thing, that there's increased risk of harm. There are no studies showing the opposite. The only studies showing, that they're safe, or like if the outcome would be like an anaphylactic reaction or something like that, or some acute, maybe a headache or some other nonsense, symptom that really doesn't have any significance in the long term. When you're looking at actually diseases, acute infections, chronic diseases, neurologic problems, there's a lot of literature out there showing harm, and unfortunately, the pediatricians are not looking at it themselves. There's no other way to say it.
Wow, that's really fascinating, and it's kind of disturbing because those pediatricians are also seeing those very children develop these conditions
Right, and they
in
don't
their
link the two
practice. They're
because
not putting it
most
together.
of their practice is are vaccinated, and
Correct.
there are some pediatricians out there who have actually started to notice these things, but most of them are not noticing them.
Well, I would just ask, do you have a takeaway that we could give to parents, to people, to pediatricians, to anybody out there who's really kind of affected by this and kind of confused?
Yeah, I think my advice is that we should just have an open mind. Let's take a look at some of these studies. I mean that's again that's how we know how to practice medicine, and from the reviewed literature, and let's see what's out there. Because once we take an honest, unbiased view of what's out there, we are going to wind up with a different understanding of reality compared to the way in which we've been um, led to believe.
Well, that sounds some really sound advice. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, and we look forward to the next episode.
Thank you. Okay, me too.